Right. Test. Okay. Everyone should be able to hear me. Good morning, everyone. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, my computer still gives me that strange message about my audio, um, telling me that I have no audio, but in fact, I do. So that's weird. But anyway, yeah, good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the first half of the chapter on new directions in epistemology. Before that, just want to make sure that everybody received my announcement that I put out yesterday. I posted it on Brightspace as well as Discord. The Discord message is just copied from Brightspace, but essentially, I've made a slight change to the course schedule. So next week is a short week for us. We only have one lecture because Thanksgiving Monday is a holiday. And for some reason, I had perception, the chapter on perception planned for that week. I don't think this is a good idea to try and tackle a whole chapter in just one lecture session. So what I've done instead is swapped the essay writing lecture with perception lecture. So next week, instead of perception, since we only have the one class, I'll tell you about the essay assignment. I know this is a ways away. It's due on the last day of class, but I figure the more you know and the earlier you know it, the better prepared you will be for this assignment. So I'll give instructions. I'll provide a link to an essay rubric. It won't be mine. I'm going to share a rubric that someone else has put together and made publicly available, but I think it'll work as a good guide for when you're putting your essays together. And I'll present you with some possible essay topics. So that's the plan for next week. And then we'll do perception the week after when we have more time to cover everything. For today, though, new directions in epistemology. Let's get myself out of the way here. This statue is mentioned by Crumley at the start of this chapter. This is The Thinker by Rodin. You've probably seen or heard of this sculpture before. And the reason why Crumley mentions it, in addition to mentioning Descartes meditating in his armchair by the fireside, is that traditional epistemology, the epistemology that we've been learning about recently, is quote unquote armchair epistemology. If you're somebody like Descartes or Hume, you don't need a laboratory to do epistemology, right? You just sit and think. I mean, think about Descartes meditating by the fire in his dressing gown at night, thinking about the foundations of his knowledge and what he could be certain about, arriving at the cogito. I think, therefore I am. Not something that required a laboratory. Or Hume, with his reasoning about cause and effect. Sure, Hume's an empiricist, so a lot of what he says is grounded in what he sees or senses. But then he just kind of thinks his way through everything. He thinks his way to the idea that there's no necessary connection between causes and effects. We just observe a constant conjunction and we formulate and then rely upon something like the uniformity principle using induction and so on and so forth. So this is armchair philosophy, and more specifically, armchair epistemology. We can just sit and think about it. And really, I think this goes all the way back to Plato. This isn't really something Crumley mentions, but I thought I'd mention it. It goes back to Plato and arguably to Aristotle. Although Aristotle was more of an empiricist, he nonetheless thought that you could work a lot of things out just by thinking about them. But Plato, if anyone's curious for an illustration of this, just check out the geometry exercise in Plato's dialogue Meno, where simply thinking, asking the right questions is enough to show that one has knowledge, or to help one arrive at knowledge, or really, more accurately, to birth those ideas, because those ideas are, for Plato, supposed to already be present, because knowledge is innate if you're a Platonist. Anyway, a few new trends began to emerge in the 20th century. The one we're going to look at today is the trend toward looking at epistemology as a part of the sciences. So, whoa, excuse me. Rather than thinking of epistemology as some kind of philosophical exercise you do prior to conducting science, this view sees epistemology as subsumed by the sciences, or even, like in the case of Quine or somebody, replaced by one or more of the sciences. So that's what we're going to look at today. Of course, the other new trend in epistemology is feminist epistemology. And that's what we'll cover next time. So feminist epistemology is kind of centered around the concern that most of the people who had been doing epistemology are men, who, of course, have had a poor relationship with a good amount of the human race for many, many years. The idea that scientists are perfectly reasonable, it's kind of an idealistic way of thinking about science. Where the good scientist has stereotypically male characteristics. The good scientist is not hindered by emotion or the passions and is reasonable. Feminist epistemology questions assumptions like that. But we'll talk more about feminist epistemology on Wednesday. For today, let's talk about naturalized epistemology. In this paper, Epistemology Naturalized, Quine argues that we ought to look at epistemology as part of the natural sciences. And he argues further that the aims of epistemology should not be to discover the justification links between evidence and belief. Rather, what epistemologists ought to do is discover the causal link between evidence and theory. So this is kind of like epistemology as a science for scientists. And this isn't really something that I think, not to knock the textbook, but I think that's something that could have been emphasized a little bit more here. Quine seems to be talking not just about epistemology as a part of the sciences, but for science. Now, granted, Quine's understanding of science is a bit more expansive than yours probably is, right? When I say science, you guys probably think of, physics, biology, maybe medicine, proper sciences. Quine has something in mind like our folk theorizing, I guess we could call it, following Quine, or rudimentary science, right? The way that we theorize about the world, the way individual people do. Anyway, let's recall some tenets of traditional epistemology. So remember, traditional epistemology is very Cartesian. We can call it Cartesian epistemology. It's epistemology that's been conducted in the legacy of René Descartes. And one of these Cartesian commitments is the commitment to foundationalism, right? We talked about this last week. Oh, gosh, I keep yawning. I'm sorry, everyone. So one of the tenets that Quine is trying to undermine here is the commitment to foundationalism. We learned about foundationalism last week. The second is the commitment to a priori reasoning. But first, recall foundationalism. The idea here is our beliefs kind of rest upon or are built upon a set of basic beliefs. These basic beliefs are justified, but they're not justified by other beliefs. That's what makes them basic. So basic beliefs could be perceptual beliefs, which are justified by perceptions. They could be introspective beliefs, which are kind of like self-evident, if you want to put it that way. It's a bit like the dress example. Some of you saw the dress as blue and black. Others saw it as white and gold. Even if you saw it as white and gold, and so that you were having a false perception of the actual colors of the dress, you could not be mistaken about the fact that you were perceiving it as white and gold. So that would be so kind of like a perceptual or maybe introspective belief. Certain a priori beliefs are included here as well, but whatever they are, whatever our set of basic beliefs are, they're supposed to be infallible. So we can't be mistaken about them. And once we have this set of beliefs, it serves as a foundation, and we can build our beliefs back up again, tracing the justification of non-basic beliefs to basic beliefs. So, and that's what Descartes does, right? He destroys all his opinions, demolishes his opinions, and then works out that the one thing that he can be certain of is that so long as he is thinking, he can be certain that he exists, and he builds back his beliefs from there. Beliefs in all kinds of things. On to the second tenet, the commitment to a priori reasoning, or the idea that epistemology is an a priori thing. We discover the conditions of justification by thinking about things a priori. We don't need to go out into the world and do anything to discover these conditions. Again, think back to Descartes, meditating by the fire, just thinking about it. That's not to say that we can't arrive at knowledge via a posteriori reasoning. We can. So we can come to know things by either using a priori reasoning or a posteriori reasoning. But the conditions for justification are known only using a priori reasoning on traditional epistemology. Now, the commitment to a priori reasoning also leads to these two further commitments that that Quine is going to take issue with that are discussed in your textbook. The first is that epistemology is distinct from the sciences. It's not the same kind of thing as the natural sciences are. We couldn't replace it with something else, like maybe psychology or cognitive science or something. And we can't really translate epistemological concepts into the concepts of another scientific discipline. So it's distinct from the sciences, and it's prior to the sciences. That's the next further feature. It reveals what knowledge is. It doesn't reveal knowledge itself, unless it's knowledge about knowledge. That's the only knowledge that epistemology on the traditional view is supposed to reveal. Knowledge about knowledge, if you like. But it reveals what knowledge is, so it's prior to the sciences. So once we know what knowledge is on the traditional view, then you can go out into the world, learn things, and know when you do and do not have an instance of knowledge. So those are the four features, or the four tenets. Knowledge has foundational structure. We can arrive at epistemological principles using a priori reasoning. And of course, epistemology is distinct from the natural sciences, and it's prior to the sciences. Which two, Tiana? I've got, so these are the four big ones here. Is it the last two that you're the first two? Okay. The first two, the idea is just that knowledge has a foundational structure, and that means we have some foundation of basic beliefs. The slides are posted. I'm pretty sure. Let me double check that. I'm fairly certain that I did post them already. So if you go to New Directions in Epistemology, and then you just go down below the lecture module, you can find them here. Yeah, they're in kind of like their own little box. So if you go to the course module and then you go down, you'll see a little sub module for lectures, and then you'll see a sub module for the slides, and you can grab the PowerPoints here or PDF version there. Yeah, sometimes if there's a little play button on the main course page for every week, and you just hit play, or it looks like not a play button, but like almost like a little fast forward button. Just hit that and it opens them right up. Oh, weird. I wonder if maybe there was an update to Brightspace or something. Anyway, so explaining the difference between yeah, it's weird. I don't know why if they made a change, I don't know why they do it in the middle of a term. It kind of throws people, right? Anyway, so what it means for knowledge to have a foundational structure is that it's like a pyramid. Like, okay, so Ernest Sosa, when he was talking about foundationalism versus coherentism, in foundationalism to a pyramid, right? Where you have basic beliefs on the bottom and you build your beliefs up. And coherentism more like a raft, where everything's tied together and depends on everything else in order for the raft to float. So knowledge has a foundational structure. The foundation is made of basic beliefs. They are justified, but they're not justified because of other beliefs. They're justified because of something else, maybe perceptions or mental states or a priori reasoning. So they're justified, they're true. They're just not justified by other beliefs. That's our foundation. All our other beliefs, we can trace the justification of those back to our foundational beliefs. The second one means that we arrive at epistemology using a priori reasoning. We think about it maybe deductively, if you like. We don't need to go out and observe the world and do anything scientific in order to arrive at our epistemological principles. It's something you can do from the armchair. So that's the difference. That was who asked that? That was Tiana. Does that help clarify the difference? I'm not sure if I've said anything that different. Okay, good. Sometimes, yeah, I find when I'm learning philosophy, yeah. Yeah, sometimes when I was learning philosophy, I found that sometimes you have to go over things a couple of times before before something really like pops, right? So to continue, along comes Quine, good old WVO Quine again, and he says, I've got this idea about natural epistemology, and I think naturalized epistemology should reject these four features of traditional epistemology. So what is naturalized epistemology? Well, it's kind of rooted in Quine's commitments to naturalism. And naturalism is the view that everything that exists is natural. Nothing exists that is not natural. That doesn't mean that, artificial things don't exist, like this desk is made by people. Obviously, it exists. It just means that all the things in nature are the only things that there are, the only things that exist. Everything that exists is either some natural object, property, or relation. There's nothing beyond the natural. So there's no supernatural, for example, right? I mean, let's try and name some natural and supernatural things. I'll get the chat going. Or not supernatural things, even just natural and non-natural things. Let's test our intuitions about what's natural and what's not, in the sense that Quine is talking about here with naturalism. So you can just offer an example, AI art. Well, I guess, yeah, that's artificial, but that's not quite what it means in this context. The Matrix, not exactly. Okay, so does supernatural include spiritual? I would say maybe. People have different beliefs, but yeah, plants, water, a tree would all be natural things. Yeah, supernatural could be the soul or ghosts. So this would be something that naturalism would actually deny existing. Supernatural include heaven and hell. It absolutely does. So spirituality, heaven and hell. No, it's not. So Jose asks, so is it like raw materials natural and anything produced of that not natural? No, actually, all the things produced by us would still count as natural things. Yeah. Yeah, Daisy's got it. People do it. We use things that are made from things that come from the world. Yeah, for Quine, for any naturalists, we would say that those things are all natural. It's not, see, we're used to hearing natural, yeah, live, of course, all living things. You know what? If you're a naturalist, here's the point I'm trying to drive home. Um, well, I think Quine would say the mind is natural, but there are some dualists who would say the mind is not natural. How do you differentiate between natural and non-natural? Yeah, dualism. Yeah, you're right. How do you differentiate between natural and non-natural? Well, I mean, I think that the confusing bit is that, we're used to hearing about this word natural in almost like well, kind of. I mean, there are things that humans can't sense without tools. I'll explain. Um, all natural. Yep, your imagination, if you're a naturalist, yeah, it just means natural world. Of the world. Yeah, exactly. So we're used to hearing this word natural, I think almost nowadays it's almost like something we hear exclusively from advertisers or something, right? Like all natural coffee or um any number of things you could think of have this all natural sort of label stuck on it. Yeah, the things that religions make, the claims that religions make, the things they make the claims about would not be natural because they're not part of the world. And that's what natural means in philosophy, nature, referring to the world, not just the planet Earth, but the physical universe. That's natural. Um, a god or gods, if they exist, would be supernatural, right? Beyond, apart from the natural world. No, beliefs are natural because we are natural creatures ourselves and we have beliefs. I'm saying that the content of the beliefs, what the beliefs are about. Say if you're religious and you believe in God, what your belief is about God is about, that's about a supernatural entity. God's not part of the world, right? God maybe creates the world, maybe he interferes sometimes, some miracles or something, but God's not a part of the world. He's separate from it. Yeah. Christian, definitely Quine is antagonistic towards skeptical arguments. I wouldn't say it denies metaphysics. In fact, this is called metaphysical naturalism, really. That's the full name. It just says that everything that exists is natural. Karma would probably be supernatural. I don't know if Quine was an atheist. I suspect that he probably was an atheist or an agnostic. If you're a naturalist, you're probably an atheist. Um, yeah, religion is a natural phenomena, as Jose says here, but the claims, the things religions make claims about, like gods and afterlives, are not natural. If they existed, they would not be natural because they're not part of the world. So that's what naturalism means here. Everything is part of the world, either an object, a property, or relation. It's all part of the world. There's nothing else. And we discover the properties and relations of these natural objects using the methods of science. Quine described naturalism this way. He said that naturalism is, quote, the recognition that it is within science itself and not in some prior philosophy that reality is to be identified and described. And here's his motivation. He thinks traditional epistemology suffers from a problem. It doesn't show us how to get a logical link between the contents of our own minds and the world. It depends on the nature of the fictitious character. All you need to know is that natural means part of the natural world. So anything supernatural, paranormal, divine, occult, all these things, if they existed, would be supernatural. Like, think about it this way. Let me open the chat back up. Yeah, ghosts would be supernatural or paranormal, right? So like if they existed, gods, angels, demons, ghosts would all be supernatural. They're not part of the world. Magic powers, wizards, anything you can think of, not part of the natural world, right? So here's what Quine is talking about. Say we take the foundationalist approach and we begin by thinking of some set of basic beliefs or a priori truths. How do we draw this logical connection between that and how the world is? That is what is actually true out there in the world. Right? After all, Descartes, for example, was doing armchair philosophy, and everything made perfect sense to him. Okay, of course, I think, therefore I am. And this allows Descartes, oh boy, excuse me. This allows Descartes to build up his all his opinions again, the nature of his own mind, the nature of bodies, um, the idea that God exists, free will exists, so on and so forth. But this is all done a priori. It's not connected to the world. It's kind of like the criticisms of coherentism that we looked at last time. Remember, what was his name? I think it was C.I. Lewis, who said that coherentism is kind of like a well-written novel, right? I can talk about some fictional world, like I can talk about characters like, oh, it's true that the One Ring came to Frodo, and it's true that Gandalf led the Fellowship to Mordor, and it's true that the Dark Lord Sauron sent the Nazgul to find the ring, right? All of that is true within the narrative of the Lord of the Rings, but that's not connected to the world, right? The same problem, the same criticism that Lewis was making against coherentism, Quine is kind of making about foundationalism. Namely, like, oh, here's, say, for example, Descartes, who's got his lovely foundation, I think, therefore I am, and builds up all this nice stuff, beliefs that, God exists and I have free will and I can trust my clear and distinct ideas and so on and so forth. That's great. But how is that connected to the world? There's no logical connection between that and the world. So that approach won't work. What if we start with our beliefs about external objects? We start with what's out there and what we believe about things out there instead of starting in here or starting from the armchair. Well, if we do that, we're already doing science, Quine says. So let's just begin with science. That's what Quine wants to do. Let's just kind of make epistemology into a science. And it won't be traditional epistemology anymore, but something like epistemology will still happen if we do that. Any questions so far? I'll just bring up the chat, wait and see if anyone has any questions. Because I know how philosophy classes go, right? You you learn a thing, you spend a week trying to learn a thing, and then the next week your professor's like, okay, so now how is it that that thing we learned last week could possibly be wrong, right? So it doesn't seem like anyone has any questions. Well, so we can't draw these connections between our epistemological principles and the world. We can't identify the principles, in other words, that tell us what we ought to believe. So why don't we start by asking how we come to believe the things that we do believe? Or as Quine put it, better to discover how science is in fact developed and learned than to fabricate a fictitious structure to a similar effect. But as I mentioned a moment ago, even if we make this swap, we replace traditional epistemology with some kind of science, maybe psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, or something like that, epistemology would still continue. So question about assessment. Knowledge of the concepts is going to be more important, but I might throw in the odd biographical detail to test you on, right? So, how are we doing for time? Okay, still pretty good for time. Yeah, no problem. So, what are some of the consequences of this? Well, if we accept Quine's approach, that we must begin by doing science and not armchair philosophy, we've identified, or rather, we've abandoned the foundationalist project. We're whatever we're doing, it's not foundationalism. Actually, it's coherentism, and I think you can see, as we learned last week, Quine is a coherentist. And I think with the material for this week, you can start to understand why Quine is a coherentist, right? He's like, epistemology just should not be this armchair thing that philosophers do. It shouldn't be prior to and distinct from the sciences. It should be a science. We should use some of our mind sciences in place of epistemology. So if you're a Quinean, you don't think we ought to use a priori reasoning to tell us about knowledge or reveal um, justification conditions or anything like that. Rather, we learn about knowledge by doing science. Now, skeptics might challenge Quine here. Oh, we're going to do science instead of traditional epistemology. Well, how do you know that you can actually do that? How do you know that you'll come to know anything with science? What are some skeptical arguments that might be offered against Quine here? I mean, one that strikes me is uh the classic issue that Descartes was concerned with, and that is, of course, whether our senses reveal the world as it really is, because science relies on the senses. Science is empirical. So a skeptic might say, well, okay, how do you know? How do you know your senses are showing you the world the way the world really is? Or Hume, right here, right? Quine says the Humean predicament is the human predicament. Hume was talking about induction, remember? How do we know? Well, why do we rely on induction? Well, we must be relying on something like the uniformity principle. That is the, say uh the future. One way we could formulate that is that the future will be like the past. But we formulated and justify that principle, which is an inductive principle, using induction. So that's circular. So how do we respond to these skeptical challenges? Here's how Quine would respond. Skepticism is an offshoot of science, he says. The basis for skepticism is the awareness of illusion, the discovery that we must not always believe our eyes. Skepticism battens on mirages, on seemingly bent sticks in water, on rainbows, after images, double images, dreams. But in what sense are these illusions? In the sense that they seem to be material objects, which they in fact are not. Illusions are illusions only relative to a prior acceptance of genuine bodies with which to contrast them. Rudimentary physical science, that is, common sense about bodies, is thus needed as a springboard for skepticism. So if you're to offer some skeptical challenges against Quine's naturalized epistemology, Quine would sort of cross-examine the skeptic and say, hang on there, Mr. Skeptic. You're asking how I can be sure that I know things using this new epistemological approach. Well, I mean, you're only a skeptic. You're only asking whether, what you perceive could be a dream or an illusion and not the real world, because you already presuppose that there is a real world that we could know about. So, haha, you're not really a skeptic, are you? Checkmate. That's what Quine is doing here. Yeah, that's true, but science does remove doubt by doubting. Um, because in science, what we try to do is falsify hypotheses. In other words, we try to prove them wrong. But Quine is saying, aha, Mr. Skeptic, do you really doubt, whether there's a world out there or whether your senses are trustworthy? Um, all these alternative sort of ways things could be that you tell me about, I could be dreaming, there could be an evil genius deceiving me. Maybe I'm in the Matrix, or I'm a brain in the vat or something. All of those all presuppose that there's a real world out there. You already have to start with rudimentary science, common sense about bodies, about things out there in the world. So skepticism presupposes science, right? We understand illusions as illusions because we already accept that there are real things out there. So that's what Quine means with that response. Any questions? We're doing very good for time. I feel like there should be more questions, though. Well, that's good to hear. All right, well, maybe we'll proceed then, but stop me if there are any questions about the material. Um, maybe we've reached an impasse, though. Quine, oh, more questions. Okay, yeah, well, at the end we'll do some question and answer. My cat will answer your questions, won't he? Hello. You're in the way, sir. Okay, so maybe wow, he sure does love to be on my desk when I give a lecture. All right, sir. Yes, go behind the computer. There you are. Right, he's behind the computer now. Yeah. You my teaching assistant, sir? Yes. So he tries to get on that keyboard. With my other cat, he never goes on the desk. He's like a floor cat. This guy, though, he likes to get up on you if he can. So, a traditional epistemologist would say, yeah, a traditional epistemologist would say maybe Quine is begging the question against the skeptic, right? Um, remember, begging the question is when the thing you're setting out to prove features as a premise in your argument. The thing that Quine is setting out to prove that may also feature as a premise in his argument is that assumption that the world exists. You know, that assumption he's operating on that skepticism presupposes a rudimentary science. Traditional epistemologists would say that Quine is just begging the question here. Um, um, Now, as I've already said, we could go around in circles here. Quine already said that, well, when skeptics rely on things like dreams or illusions, they're already assuming the objects of a rudimentary science. So, yeah, we could go in circles forever here. So we're going to leave this behind. Um, let's talk about what a naturalized epistemology would actually look like. We would firstly have to abandon the idea that our theoretical beliefs, and this is beliefs from scientific theories all the way down to folk theories. That is sort of the rudimentary science that Quine is talking about, the common sense understanding of everyday objects in the world. So a theory could be something really grand and complicated, like the theory of general relativity, or it just could be your personal folk theories, your folk notions of how objects behave when you drop them. We abandon the idea that any of these beliefs are justified by virtue of a connection with basic beliefs. If we want to justify a belief, maybe some belief about the nature of light, for example, we don't do that by connecting it to basic beliefs about what our senses tell us. Instead, what we do is we do something like cognitive neuroscience, or maybe cognitive psychology, or just generally speaking, the cognitive sciences. They'll tell the story of how we go from what our senses tell us about the world, all the way up to our theoretical beliefs about the world. If you're a foundationalist, yes. But remember, Quine is a coherentist. So he doesn't think of this as basic. This will become clearer in a moment, I think. Let's go to the next slide. So the reason why this isn't really a basic belief is because we're not doing this from the armchair. We're not giving an a priori account of justification and the links, why our basic beliefs are justified, and why our non-basic beliefs are justified in virtue of our basic beliefs. Yeah, I think you could characterize it along those lines. I'll explain. The important part is causality, right? Naturalized epistemology doesn't focus on justification links. It focuses on causes and effects, right? So naturalized epistemology would do something like this. It would use some empirical science to tell us all of the steps in the causal chain, from light hitting our retina to, causing nerves in our optic nerve fibers in the optic nerves and the optic tract to fire, all the way to representing, to building rudimentary representations, to building three-dimensional mental representations, to then applying concepts and going, oh, look, a philosophy book on my desk, right? That is a causal story. That's what natural epistemology is supposed to do. It's supposed to give us a sort of step-by-step picture of this causal chain that starts out there in the world and ends up in the mind, going from the world to sensation to perception to cognition. And cognition is where our beliefs are, if you like. Now, here's the thing. This might count as scientific justification, and that's great, but it definitely doesn't count as epistemological justification in the sense that traditional epistemologists have in mind. Also, and this is a really important difference, traditional epistemology is normative. So it tells us what we ought to believe, what we should believe. It tells you when you have knowledge versus just a true belief. But naturalized epistemology is descriptive. So it doesn't tell us what we ought to believe or disbelieve. It only tells us what we do, in fact, believe. So now for traditional epistemologists, this normative character of epistemology is really important. So normative comes from the word norm. A norm is like a rule that tells us how things should be. Descriptions only tell us how things are. And you can compare CF, that's just a Latin abbreviation for compare, the is-ought problem, which was also articulated by David Hume. So the world is a certain way, descriptive, but how ought the world be? That's the is-ought problem. And it's sort of like for Hume, it's a moral issue, right? Hume is kind of concerned with questions like, just because this is the way things are, does that mean it's the way they should be? That's the kind of thing that Hume is concerned with here. But we'll call this the normative descriptive distinction. So normative things like epistemology or like logic tell us, they provide oughts or shoulds. So epistemology identifies knowledge, and we want knowledge. So in a way, traditional epistemology can tell you what you ought to believe. Logic tells you the rules you ought to follow for proper reasoning. Psychology just describes how people actually do reason. So it's not normative, it's just descriptive. And overall, you can draw this, at least the traditional conception of a lot of philosophy is that it's normative, whereas science is descriptive. And this difference, this distinction between the normative and the description opens a door to a really big criticism of naturalized epistemology that comes from Jaegwon Kim, who was an epistemologist of the 20th century. He argued that science really just gives us descriptive pictures of cause and effect relations in nature, causal accounts of things that go on in the natural world. And it explains why things happen the way they do. But questions like, should we count these scientific beliefs as justified? Those are not questions that science is supposed to deal with. So the causal story is not the same story as the story of justification. And traditional epistemologists are interested in the story of justification. When are we justified in believing certain propositions? That's what an epistemologist ought to really be interested in. The causal story is just a picture of how nature works. It doesn't tell us what we ought to believe or disbelieve. I mean, think about it. Even Hume also didn't think that causal relations are justificatory relations. And for Kim, it's the justificatory relations between our beliefs, perhaps between basic and non-basic ones, if you're a foundationalist. It's these relations that really characterize epistemology, and naturalized epistemology gives up on answering this challenge, explaining why beliefs are justified. It just doesn't do it. So if you have an epistemology that isn't normative, it's not epistemology. That's what Kim is saying here. So does everyone understand Jaegwon Kim's point? It is epistemology that's prior to the sciences. Advances in the former can aid and constrain the latter, but not Stanford. Yeah, this sounds like yeah. There are some folks that would agree with this. And by the way, yeah, Stanford Encyclopedia. Normally citing encyclopedias is discouraged, but the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is an encyclopedia of philosophy, as the name implies. Written by philosophers, actual philosophers. So the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, or SEP, is actually a pretty good resource. So yeah, here this is like what's it it's there in the slides. We're almost there, actually. This sounds like cooperative naturalism to me. Yeah. Yeah, Jose, that's right. So yeah, epistemology is prior to the sciences. There could be some back and forth. It really depends what kind of naturalist you are. So maybe this will become clear when I explain the sort of different versions of natural epistemology. Ugh, okay. But yeah, Kim was like, dude, you missed the point. Like, come on, epistemology is supposed to be normative. This isn't normative, it's just descriptive. Like, what the hell, Quine? But how would a natural epistemologist respond to Quine? Or respond to Kim, rather? Well, Quine, now I'm mixing them up. So Kim thinks that one of the chief distinctions between science and philosophy, particularly epistemology, is that epistemology is normative, science is not. Quine thinks that science is normative. It's not merely descriptive. Science is also normative. And what he means there is that it is the scientific method that tells us what we ought to believe. We are justified in believing things that we arrive at, believing conclusions we arrive at via the scientific method. But this isn't an a priori matter, right? Science arrived at the scientific method using a posteriori reasoning over time, actually doing science, right? It's not like someone sat down in an armchair and thought up modern science. Okay, this is how we'll do it, right? No one did that. Science has evolved and changed, and over time, it's become better at figuring out how the world works, right? It used to be that science was just a matter of observation and reasoning. So the pre-Socratic philosophers did this, Aristotle did this, the inductivists of the early modern period, and even some in the Middle Ages, right? You could just go out and observe the world and think about it. Slowly, something emerged called positivism, which was about verifying truth claims. Only true propositions were meaningful. So statements about the world that are true are what we want. And science works by formulating these propositions and then trying to verify them. And then eventually along comes a guy called Karl Popper, who says that actually what scientists really do is they try and falsify. And if you repeatedly fail to falsify a hypothesis, your certainty that that hypothesis says something true about the world increases. And that's how we do science now. Now, we worked out that each new approach was better than the last one by actually doing science and by trying to make science better. We weren't thinking about it from the armchair. We were actually doing it. Or the example in the textbook, now when we test drugs like a new medicine, we use a double-blind trial. In a double-blind trial, neither the scientist nor the participant know who's in the group that gets the drug and the group that gets the placebo. The reason why we do this is because we learned that if the researchers knew who was taking what, it could actually bias the results of the study. So we learned by doing science to do science differently. And all of this is the important part. The scientific method is normative. It means it's normative. It's like a self-correcting method of discovering, but also providing the justification links that we want. It's like it bootstraps its way into informing us which beliefs are justified and unjustified. This saying, bootstrapping, it's like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It's an old saying, like imagine you're stuck in the mud and no one can come and get you out. Someone might say, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like as if you could grab your bootstraps and just lift yourself up out of the mud, right? That's kind of what science does, Quine says. It bootstraps its way into informing us about justified and unjustified beliefs. There are other ways of responding to these criticisms besides the way Quine does it, though. Maybe the normative elements of natural epistemology could depend on natural processes or properties. So this way, you can just say that normative properties are natural. They're not non-natural or extra-natural or even supernatural. They're just a thing we do, and we're natural beings. So normative properties are natural properties. I mean, just think of Alvin Goldman and his reliabilism. Recall that on reliabilism, justification is a matter of having arrived at a true belief via a reliable belief forming process. And how do we identify which belief forming processes are reliable? Well, we do it with science. So something like cognitive psychology can explain how people arrive at true beliefs by giving this causal information processing account of human learning and thinking. And again, this is not a priori, this is a posteriori, this is empirical. It's science um, discovering things about the natural world and providing justification at the same time. Now, this is different from Quine's approach. Goldman's approach is not the same as Quine's, but Goldman still says that what he is doing is also naturalized epistemology. Okay, any questions so far? I think we only have one more slide left, so whoops. So I can take questions at the end if no one has any questions now. Well, um, here's some ways. We'll just close out by thinking of some ways that we can think about the relationship between traditional epistemology and natural epistemology. These are all outlined by Feldman. We've got replacement naturalism, substantive naturalism, and cooperative naturalism. So on replacement naturalism, traditional epistemology ought to be replaced by an empirical science or a combination of empirical sciences. This is what Quine wants, right? Quine straight up says, let's replace traditional epistemology with something like psychology. And it won't be traditional epistemology anymore, but something like traditional epistemology will continue and it'll be fine. We could also have substantive naturalism. Epistemic properties on substantive naturalism are a part of the natural world. So being justified is a matter of being traceable to natural properties or facts. And what we just talked about, Goldman's reliabilism would be an example of substantive naturalism. There's also cooperative naturalism. Cooperative naturalists would see epistemology as autonomous from the sciences. So so science is still descriptive and epistemology is still normative. The questions that belong to traditional epistemology, questions about justification, are still questions for the epistemologist, not the scientist. But maybe an epistemologist would still take into account the results of, psychological or cognitive sciences that could influence the development of epistemological theory. So here, epistemology is still independent from the sciences, but they get along with the sciences. And I'll say, like, this is fun doing it this way. My two the people who supervised my doctoral research, one of them was an epistemologist, and the other was a cognitive psychologist. So actually, I was kind of, I guess, being a cooperative naturalist while I was working on my PhD thesis. That's all. Next time we'll talk about feminist epistemology. But are there any questions about today's material? I know we're wrapping up a little early, so I hope there are some questions. I'll just wait. I'll keep the chat open here for a bit. I know someone said they had a question that they wanted to ask at the end. We'll just wait for them. All right. So, The last slide is, it's not exclusively naturalized philosophy, it's views of the relationship between natural and traditional epistemology. That's what it means. So one is like, get rid of epistemology and replace it with science. The other is, let me go back. So we can get rid of replacement naturalism, replace traditional epistemology with natural epistemology. Substantive naturalism, we just kind of change our view of what we think epistemic properties are, so that so that so that science and epistemology sort of work together, or are the sort of same thing. And then cooperative naturalism, where they remain separate and autonomous, but they complement one another. So the last two features of traditional epistemology are that it's prior to and distinct from the sciences. It's something you ought to do before you do science, and it's not science itself. It's something different. Yeah, the test. So the test is the week of the 13th. So, yeah, that means the beginning of next week. So the 9th, I'll open up the test, and it'll remain available for you to do from the 9th to the 13th. So you can start at any time in those 2 days, but once you begin, there will be a time limit. So that's how that will work. Issues with the similarities between the chapters. I don't really know. What do you mean the similarities between the chapters? I guess I'll need you to expand on that. Next question is yeah, normative and descriptive. Well, just remember, norms are oughts or shoulds, and descriptions are ises, right? When you're describing something, you're just saying the way it is. When you're describing when you're giving a normative account of something, you're arguing for the way it ought to be. Are feminist epistemologists always going to be social constructivists? Well, yeah, we'll get to talk about this more next time, but no, not always. Not always. Yeah, the test, you won't be able to start and stop. Once you begin, you've got to go all the way through. Yes, that's right. You can use your notes for the tests, but you will want to study beforehand, right? Because you don't realize how fast the time goes when you write a test. I think I'll probably give you 90 minutes. Because that's the length you would have if you were to do it in class. Yeah, I have office hours every Tuesday. I have in-person office hours. You can ask me questions about the test, but I'm not holding any kind of review. Yeah, 90 minutes. So the length of one class. I'm thinking probably 15 to 20 multiple choice short answer, or multiple choice, and then maybe 5 short answer where you write about a paragraph. It's not as bad as it sounds. Yeah, it's not as bad as it sounds. Like, I don't believe in, yeah, I don't believe in well, you need to know everything that we've covered up until up through this week. Um and like, I don't believe in trick questions. I'm not going to try and trip you up. My questions tend to be fairly straightforward. Yeah, like we're covering, so everything from chapter 1 to the chapter that we're on now will be on the test. I'm not going to test you on anything like anything we learned the week of the test. Yeah, that's crazy. 120 questions in 120 minutes. That's insane. But yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. Now I'm not going to use trick questions. That's not to say you won't have to think carefully about how you answer them. And also, I'm probably going to throw in maybe 5 or so fill in the blanks. So you're going to have, 15 to 20 multiple choice, true, false, a few fill in the blanks, some short answers where you got to write maybe a paragraph or two, and read the questions carefully, because the questions will indicate exactly what I'm expecting in the answer. And you'll get between 1 and 5 points depending on how much information, how much correct information you give. So yeah, my tests are, I would say they're tough but fair, right? Maybe you guys are all in the same psych class. But those psych professors, yeah, with their Scantron sheets, just like, okay, here's your test, 120 questions, just do. I don't believe in that. I don't want you to just learn by rote. I want you to think about and use what you're learning. Well, the slides are drawn from the readings, but let's say the readings. It's the readings and my lectures. Because like you're not going to get the full benefit if you haven't done the readings, right? I can lecture you till the cows come home. You've still got to read the book to really understand where I'm coming from, because my lectures are following the chapters like pretty much like in lockstep with the chapters. And I'll add an extra thing here or there, but yeah. Goldman's reliabilism, is he saying, is a natural process? Yeah, that's what he's saying. Exactly. Our reliable belief forming processes are like the sort of are the ways we come to know things as human beings normally. Those are our belief forming processes, and they're reliable if they're reliable ways to generate knowledge, as opposed to just true belief or opposed to false beliefs, right? Oh, damn. Good for you, Casey. I mean, the nice thing is these chapters, they can be a little dry, but they're not super long. But yeah, it'll be chapters one to 4, which I believe I believe we're on week 5 now. Um, I always get mixed up what week we're on. Escape, minimize. Um, ah, okay, let's get myself out of the way here. We are on week 5. Yes, so 1 to 5. But week 1 we didn't really do anything. So yeah, everything up until this week. Um, I believe that is everything. Yeah, you should have time to use the book, but in this case, I mean, but study beforehand, because you might not have time to look up everything, right? Anyway, that's all for today. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Yeah, well, stick with it. I mean, it's tricky, and remember, you can email me if you're really stuck. Email me and I'll try and explain it as clearly as I can. Don't forget the Discord server, right? I know that some students have to review this stuff a little bit more than others, right? So there may be a student who's just got it and might be happy to help share their understanding with you via the Discord server. So don't be afraid to talk amongst yourselves about the material. It's a great way to help yourselves come to know new things. So thanks, everyone. I bid you adieu, and I will I will see you. I'm so sleepy. I need more coffee. I will see you on Wednesday. Bye for now, everyone.